welcome to Film in Focus here on Beyond Radio. I'm the cinema professor, and that was David Mansfield with a track from The Heaven's Gate, the movie, from the soundtrack. Nice bit of music to open the show. And that brings us on to why we're here tonight. It will be my last show for a while. And as part of it, or as the bulk of it, me and Ray Turner will be discussing the two films, the two sort of cult films from the 80s originally, Heaven's Gate and Bladerunner, so two quite different films. But yes, so we open with that track. This show goes out to Ellie and also Honra, two friends of mine. Thanks for listening. If you want to get involved with the show, you can text 07 399 085508 or email studio@beyondradio.co.uk. So Ray Turner's here. Thank you, Ray, once again.
Hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, thank you.
Good. So just as a setup, you're going to be talking about Heaven's Gate and Blade Runner. Just explain why you've picked those two films.
Well, I picked them because last week you asked me to list my top 10 films of the 21st century. And I wanted to include those two films because they were both finished in the 21st century. They were never really quite made properly at the time. And, you know, Blade Runner got... it got its director's cut in the early 90s, but apparently that wasn't really a director's cut, and then it got a final cut in 2007. Heaven's Gate got a kind of cut in the 80s. Then it was recut in 1981, much shorter, and then it got its final proper, the director was given the chance to really cut it the way he wanted it in 2012.
Okay.
Was it 2012 or 20? Yes, it was 2012. And I wanted to include them in my top 10 films of the 21st century, and you wouldn't let me. You said no, they're from the 1980s.
Cool.
And so I thought, well, what, you know, it's a thing to talk about, isn't it? These two films that I personally just absolutely love, and I thought they deserved a show. But you've done some stuff on Blade Runner, but probably...
Yeah, I mean, we're going to cover both, but I mean, we'll start with, obviously, Heaven's Gate. I think potentially that's the more meaty discussion.
It is. I mean, it's probably the more interesting film in terms of production.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was going to just wanted to read some reviews that it got at the time. This is in 1980.
Also, can you just set it up roughly, the plot, for people who don't know?
I mean, okay, well, I'll start with that then.
Okay.
So the story of Heaven's Gate is based on a true story, which is the Johnson County War, and it's where the Stockholders Association paid mercenaries to murder 125 immigrants. So the Stockholders Association was, Eastern sort of businessmen, rich, and had cattle and stuff, and they were trading and they were making money, and poor immigrant landowners and farmers, I mean, they were struggling and they were, starving, stole some of their cattle. And they suspected 125 of them, and they paid mercenaries to go out and murder them. And it's not really a very well-known part of American history, but Cimino found out about it, kind of by accident, I think, and then he wrote a script about it. And what's slightly controversial about his script is he claims in the film that it was done with the backing of the American government, and in fact the president knew it was happening and kind of gave his blessing. And I think that is quite heavily disputed.
Yeah.
But that's what the film asserts. So that's the kind of script and the setup. I mean, it's got a lot more in it than that. And Cimino wanted to make this absolute epic. He kept saying he wanted to make a film that was like Gone with the Wind. But it's very long. It's very kind of lumbering. It's quite a strange film. Maybe we should come to that in a bit, actually.
I mean, if you want, you can set it up with some...
Yeah, what the actual film itself is kind of like.
Yeah.
But, I kind of did want to read some reviews, because this is
I think it's a good idea because of its reputation.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, so in 1981, Roger Ebert said, this movie is $36 million thrown to the wind. This movie is $36 million thrown to the winds. It is the most scandalous cinematic waste I've ever seen. And remember, I've seen Paint Your Wagon. Variety said, Michael Cimino's film is so confusing, so overlong at 3.5 hours, and so ponderous that it fails to work at almost every level. And probably most famously, Vincent Canby in the New York Times said, Heaven's Gate, which opens today at the Cinema One, fails so completely that you might suspect Mr. Cimino sold his soul to the devil to obtain the success of The Deer Hunter, and the devil has just come around to collect. The grandeur of vision of the Vietnam film has turned pretentious. The feeling for character has vanished, and Mr. Cimino's approach to his subject is so predictable that watching the film is like a forced 4-hour walking tour of one's own living room. Heaven's Gate is something quite rare in movies these days, an unqualified disaster. So that's kind of an idea of what the reviewers thought of the film at the time.
Down the storm then, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and it's an interesting thing because he had just made The Deer Hunter, which won 5 Oscars, and he kind of got the backing for Heaven's Gate on the back of it. Not on the back of it winning the Oscars, just when they saw a cut of The Deer Hunter, they sort of said, this guy's a genius, we're going to give him anything he wants. And the producers, I think, signed a bit of a awkward contract for themselves. They kind of said, this guy can just do whatever he wants because he can do no wrong. And what they didn't reckon with, really, I think, was Cimino's kind of ego, which was huge. I mean, and he just didn't care about anything other than making the perfect film. And, you know, the stories of kind of the level of perfection that he was trying to attain. I mean, one of the things that you know I heard about is there was a shot of Chris Christopherson, who's the star of the film, drunk in bed, and he wakes up. There's some people standing around the bed, and he picks up a bullwhip and just whips it across the room. And they did more than 60 takes of this one shot, and people got injured because it was a real bullwhip. People got hurt in this, including Chris Christopherson, got hit with the whip. Things like they did 60 takes. They spent an entire day doing this one shot, and it's on screen for less than a second.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so that's not the rest of the scene. That's the shot. That one shot they spent an entire day on. And this was the kind of thing that they were doing. And Cimino was just saying, I'm going to make this perfect. And he was building huge sets that were costing outrageous amounts of money. And apparently they did something where they built a set 6 feet too narrow, a street. It was 6 feet too narrow. And he insisted they tore it down and rebuild it. Because they said, well, we'll tear down one side. You know, we'll rebuild one side 6 feet over. And he went, no, you've got to tear the whole thing down. And you've got to do 3 feet either way. So, and things like that. And I mean, this kind of slightly insane kind of ego that just didn't care. And so, and one of the things that, you know, I've been reading about, I've been doing some actual research for this, Keith. But one of the things I was kind of reading about, that you know, he on 2 weeks into the production, they were 10 days behind schedule on the shoot. And they had shot 3 minutes of usable footage. I mean, they shot several hours of footage, but only 3 minutes of actual finished screen time, which I think on an average film, that's about a day's work, really. You average about 3 minutes a day, I think, 2 to 3 minutes. But 2 weeks, and they'd shot 3 minutes, and it had cost $3 million to shoot those 3 minutes. So at that rate, you know, this ended up being a nearly 4-hour-long film, a 3.5-hour long film. You know, that was, it was certainly going to cost a lot of money. So yeah, I mean, this kind of his ego just kind of went out of control. His sense of perfection, how much perfection he wanted in this film, went out of control, and it just caused lots and lots and lots of problems. The film was budgeted at $11.5 million, which was more than the average film around then.
Yeah, at that time.
Films at that time were, you know, about $7 or $8 million.
Yeah.
It ended up costing, and there are disputes about this, but I mean, Cimino claimed, including publicity and everything, he claimed it cost $32 million. Everybody else is saying it's $44 million.
Right.
So I mean, you know, that's four times over budget.
Yeah.
And it was a big budget film to start with. And there was things like, you know, the producers didn't agree with him casting Isabelle Huppert in the film, who didn't speak English when he cast her, barely spoke English. And they had to like knuckle down and let him, because they'd signed all these weird contracts. So he could do what he wanted. But I think for a while it was all kind of slightly in-house. And then a freelance journalist called Les Gaspé was trying to get on the set, and Cimino wouldn't allow any press on the film at all, wouldn't allow any journalists on the set or anything like that. But this guy, Les Gaspé, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right. I hope I am. Gaspé, I don't know. He got himself a job as an extra, so he was on the set for 3 months. And when he came off, he wrote about the production, and he wrote about kind of this rampant ego going mad, and there seemed to be a bit of kind of hand-wringing and sort of, sort of gleeful hand-wringing from all these other journalists who were like, aha, this guy's this brilliant, director. He made the film, he made The Deer Hunter, and, he's fantastic. And he's gonna get it all wrong with this one. He's gonna mess up royally. And they started writing about it. They started writing that, the excesses and just, that he was making people stand around for hours and hours and hours waiting for the right shaped cloud, to pass in front of the sun or whatever, and nobody was very happy on the film, I think, apart from him. I think he was delighted because he was producing he's Gone with the Wind. But it started to get a bit of momentum. This kind of idea started to get momentum. And so all the time that the film was being made, all anybody was saying about it was the kind of waste and the excess. And the excessive kind of, all the stuff that was going on. And so when the film was finally released, there was this kind of sense, I think, that the journalists were kind of reviewing the process that it had gone through and not reviewing the final film. So it was quite an interesting thing. So I think, those reviews I read, I don't know that these people were really quite watching the same film I saw, if you know what I mean, because I saw it and just kind of, I didn't really know all this stuff the first time I saw it. I kind of knew a little bit of it, but I didn't know.
I think there's a balance, isn't it? I think on the one hand, if they're saying it's quite baggy, it's quite self-indulgent, that sort of thing, and picking holes, those are legitimate criticisms, if that's what they're saying. But on the other hand, if they're not understanding what the film's trying to do, if they're not, because obviously, something I would say is that it's very different from other westerns. If you take
absolutely,
it's a really, really different experience from most other films and certainly most westerns. So
it certainly is.
They have to go in with that mindset. They have to review it on those terms.
And I think that's the interesting thing, because I didn't see it so long after all these reviewers. To be fair, it did better in Europe. It got better reviews in Europe, although I'm not sure how well it got. I'm not sure it got seen really in Europe at the cinema. I think it kind of got seen at cinemas and things, but on television and things like that, but not so much at cinemas. I've lost what I was saying. There seemed to be a sort of sense of they were angry about the fact that he had, not treated them well. And there seemed to be, and people do kind of love the idea of, somebody who's being praised to high heaven messes up. That's kind of, it's probably good journalism, it's not good journalism.
Sorry, who are you saying felt he didn't treat them well, the critics or the people?
Well, the press, I think, because he banned the press from the screen. They would have liked to have kind of gone in and see what was going on, but he just wasn't going to allow that.
Right.
But also on top of that, I think there was a kind of an element of, because they'd built him up with the Deer Hunter, the idea that he wasn't going to repeat this success, but he kind of thought he was.
Yeah.
He obviously thought, I'm going to make an even more important film than The Deer Hunter. And he was obviously trying to make an important film. So what he ended up with was a Western, which I guess wasn't popular in 1980 anyway. And it was very much a film, I think, that, well, actually, no, I'll come back to that. So he made a Western, which wasn't popular. It was it was 219 minutes, the final version that he released. So what's that, 3 hours, 39 minutes, is it?
Yeah.
And it's not full of action. It's not cowboys and Indians. It's sort of anti-American. I mean, Chris Christopherson reckons in an interview that I read with him that he says that I've got to find it. He says it was because of the themes of the film. He said that Reagan's first Attorney General, William French Smith, had told studio heads there should be no more pictures made with a negative view of American history. So he actually thinks it was kind of a political move that the film was.
Yeah,
Yeah. But I mean, to be fair, the film is. It's part of me wants to say it's painfully slow, but I don't think it is. I don't think it's slow. I think it's paced beautifully. I mean, I think it's just not paced like almost any other film.
Yeah.
It has strange long sequences. I mean, and I think it, and actually that's something that I think maybe has aged better. But it has long sequences where people just dance. And there's a whole 25-minute opening sequence which really adds nothing to the. It's basically Chris Christopherson and John Hurt graduating from Harvard, and they're lawyers and.
So that's the scene you could argue could be cut, and maybe that's part of the.
Yeah.
If you see it as overlong, that's one scene that could be.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely could, but it establishes the relationship between the two of them, and it kind of establishes the way the film is. The kind of the pace of the film and the way you watch the film, because you don't watch this film kind of going, "Well, get to the next scene." Then you kind of watch it, kind of going, "This is amazing. This is beautiful." Just watching these people kind of live, and actually do what they do. And I mean, there's some incredibly, amazing sequences. I mean, one of the really sort of famous sequences, I think it's quite famous, is the roller skating sequence. There's a sequence that goes on for a really long time, doesn't it? Where they just play music. David Mansfield is actually in the film on roller skates playing the fiddle.
That's a nice touch.
And and then all these people kind of all start roller skating around this hall, which is actually Heaven's Gate, is the hall that they all kind of meet in all the time. And so they start roller skating around this hall, and then that kind of goes away. And then Chris Christopherson and Isabelle Huppert just start waltzing, and that goes on for a really long time. And it's just these incredibly long, beautiful sequences. And I think you either kind of go, "This is amazing," or you kind of go, "This is not the film for me." But to sort of kind of go, "Well, I just think they could speed this up a bit," is kind of missing the point, I think, of the film. But that's what they did. The film, the 219-minute version of the film, was released for 1 week in 1980, and then it got these kind of mauling reviews, which were, just horrendous. And then Cimino himself actually pulled the film because he said that he'd had to rush the editing to meet a Christmas deadline. Which is quite insane after spending, nearly a year, or I think he spent 11 months shooting the film.
Yeah.
And this level of perfection that was insane. And then he had to rush the editing to meet a Christmas deadline because of the Oscars. That's why they had to make the Christmas deadline. But he withdrew the film and said, "Please let me cut this film properly the way I want to cut it." And, he was aware, I think, of the way the critics had treated the film. And he didn't want... And obviously one of the criticisms, I think, was that the film was too long. So he took it away and he cut it down to 149 minutes, so just under 2.5 hours, and in 5 months. And it was re-released again in 1981, but I think the damage had already been done, and it got released for 2 weeks then, and then it was pulled. And it never really saw the light of day again, in the cinemas anyway. So in that time, so it's a film that cost, depending on who you believe, but most people say $44 million. It made back less than $4 million. So quite bad.
Yeah.
It is said to have bankrupted United Artists. But United Artists were actually owned by Transamerican, who were not a film company, and they weren't entirely happy with film production. And it seems that maybe they used it as a bit of an excuse to kind of get rid of, United Artists, and it was sold to MGM.
Okay.
And it basically closed, which is, a shame, because United Artists was the studio that was giving money to more interesting projects in the 70s. So it's quite interesting sort of in the 70s, which is this era of Hollywood making these great sort of films like sort of Taxi Driver and, I don't know, Chinatown, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that sort of thing. By 1980, that studio, or in 1980, because of kind of giving too much power to a director, that studio went under. But actually, Transamerican, they had a minor blip in their share prices, and it had recovered within a week. So the idea that Heaven's Gate did bring down United Artists is not really quite true.
Yeah, it's a bit shaky.
It's a bit of it's a slightly ingenuous kind of idea, I think. So what the other thing that's kind of really interesting about Heaven's Gate is it popularised the idea of a director's cut, because it was never shown in cinemas, and I don't know if it was shown in cinemas in Europe. I mean, I don't think it was.
Right.
But it got shown on a cable channel on TV, and they showed the full 219-minute version, and they called it the director's cut, which was a kind of a new concept, this idea that you had a director's cut of a film and a kind of another cut. But of course, after that, films like Lawrence of Arabia started to come out, and what were the others that happened around that time? And Blade Runner, not too long after, I guess, got a director's cut. But there was quite a lot of other films that was, Donnie Darko and...
The Exorcist,
Did The Exorcist...
That was
oh, yes, it did, didn't it?
Because of the spider walk scene and a few extra scenes.
Yeah, I mean, so...
Back in cinema.
Yeah, so all these films got, and Heaven's Gate may have been the first film that sort of... that did that. So it popularised director's cuts.
Influential in that way. Yeah.
But anyway, what then happened was the film just languished. Cimino had a bit of a career. He made 3 other films, I think. 3 or 4. 4 other films. Year of the Dragon, The Sicilian, Desperate Hours, not After Hours, and Sun Chaser, which... I've only seen Year of the Dragon out of those, which actually is actually good. It's a really good film with Mickey Rourke, kind of cop drama. But he made them all on budget, all on schedule. He didn't go off on this. But his career was kind of crippled. And then the original producer of the film got in touch with him and said, it's about time you did this film right. You made Heaven's Gate right. So this is in I don't know when he started, but this is in the 21st century. And they apparently, I was reading stuff about this. I didn't entirely understand, but I think they destroyed the negative. They'd cut the negative down to the 149-minute version. They'd cut the original negative, which I didn't think they did, but apparently they did. And so they had to go back and do some special digital kind of... They had to take each individual colour or something and print them properly. And he got to re-edit the film how he would have liked to have done it in 1980. And he's come up with a 216-minute version of the film, which is almost identical to the original version that he released. But the main thing he's done... And actually, it's quite interesting because the similar thing happened with Blade Runner. Is they've regraded the colours because when I first saw the film, it had a sepia look to it, and I just thought it was deliberate because it's a period piece, and the colours are almost black and white, and some of it really is almost black and white. But apparently that isn't what he wanted, and he made the colours. Kind of more saturated, and you can actually see the colours. And I mean, it is gorgeous photography. It is absolutely beautiful to look at this film. And so in 2012, sorry, it's because it's 2012 and 216-minute version. They released it, and it's fair to say it got better reviews. So it was released at the Venice Film Festival, and Alberto Barbara, who was the director of the festival, called it an absolute masterpiece. And he described cutting it down as a massacre and one of the greatest injustices of cinematic history. And on the BBC website, Nicholas Barber. So this is in 2015. He said, "So much of Heaven's Gate is patently splendid that it is mind-boggling that anyone could pronounce it an unqualified disaster. And the scenes which were slammed in 1980 as being symptomatic of waste and excess, the Harvard waltz, the massed roller skating, are the scenes which take your breath away." And because of the subject matter, all about kind of, big business, literally murdering immigrants, he said, however unwelcome Heaven's Gate may have been in 1980, there hasn't been a more urgently topical film in 2015. So yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the film is being reappraised, and it's I think deserves it, because I saw it when I first saw it. I think I saw it on TV the first time, and I just found it breathtaking because it is so beautiful. I mean, in 4:3 I saw it, and then it got a release at the National Film Theatre in the kind of 90s, the full 219-minute version, and it was on for a week. And I remember going to see it, on the Monday, and then going again on the Friday, because I thought I'll never get another chance to see this in a cinema. And it is just breathtaking, and everything about it was original. I mean, the way he told the story was different. It was unintentional, but the sepia was kind of, so extreme. It's like he pushed that, and he just didn't compromise on anything. And even the kind of the use of the sound, the way he did the sound, he'd gone for this kind of realism, and he used sort of, it's a Western, so you've got this kind of horses and carts and sort of things, and people having conversations. And I've got a clip to play, which is an example. It's not a very long clip, but this is a really important piece of plot. And perhaps this is one of the reasons that people didn't like the film in the first place. But this is a kind of very important piece of plot that's being revealed, and you can barely hear what they're saying.
Yeah.
So
What's going on here, Collie? Well, you hear a lot of things around the rail depot, Jim. Rumours mostly. Listen, I can't afford to get involved. Damn it, I just got this job. I was over last night to the Shades Hotel, having myself some Baltimore oysters. And I met up with a couple of citizens there, Mr. Morrison and Mr. Budley. No, that ain't right. Dudley, that's what it was, Dudley. One of the biggest dumb citizens I ever seen. With two eyes in his head like a dead fish. But I had a long drink with this Morrison and Dudley, and they said to me that they was currently in the employ of the Stock Rollers Association, and that the association was hiring up a big mob from all over the Northwest. Well, every citizen's business is his own affair, not mine, damn it.
I believe our family association will call while I'm here. Watch my business, Ellie.
Right, Jim, right.
That was a clip from Heaven's Gate. So
yeah, so that's an example of how uncompromising he was. He didn't care whether people could hear it, as long as he kind of got the realism in. So it was, and you can hear that. That was quite an important piece of plot that's being revealed there. And if you miss it, you spend the rest of the film being a bit confused. And possibly that's why, people didn't respond to it at the time.
yeah.
You saw the film.
I think you've done quite a good job of summing it up and talking in depth about the production and why you obviously feel it's very unique. And I'm assuming you see it as a masterpiece.
I do see it as a masterpiece, and I do. It was such a beautiful experience to watch, and it was so kind of, what's the word? You just kind of relax in your seat, and you're just with this for 4 hours, and you are watching these people, and it's quite nasty in places. It's pretty brutal in places.
Yeah, there's a harshness to it.
But there's a real. But these people are living this life. That's what you feel, or what I feel when I'm watching it, and I'm just kind of watching it. I mean, to use a really kind of crass analogy, it's like when you watch a soap opera or something. You're not watching anything very exciting, but you're really involved in these people's lives. And I think Heaven's Gate's like that, really, that you are watching, a $40 million Coronation Street. I mean, it looks beautiful, but you've got stuff going on, and but it's not always action. It's not always driving the plot.
Yeah.
Some of it is just kind of, let's just watch these people dance. And as that reviewer said, Nicholas Barber, that is the stuff that takes your breath away.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a big gun battle at the end, but it's not sort of, it's not really about gun battles.
But it sort of builds to that, so that's a big moment in itself. There's a real... Without spoiling the ending, there's a real gut
absolutely,
punch at the end.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
the way it happens, you sort of think, oh, okay. And it takes your breath.
So that's my take on Heaven's Gate. But you saw it for the first time. You haven't said what you.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, I watched it with you for the first time. Yeah, I think much of your praise is valid. I mean, obviously, I don't quite get the extreme criticism. I mean, I think you touched on something very interesting. I think the fact then, potentially nothing happens that time or nothing very much. But it is this just ambitious epic. And I mean, just considering, because that's the thing, it may be an epic, but it's not a particularly boring epic. Constantly there's interesting things and strange things and interesting characters.
And it's a really interesting way of storytelling. It's almost unique. I mean, I've never really seen it. I mean, even someone like Andrei Tarkovsky or something who makes kind of ponderous kind of films.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can have an epic or an art house film that looks very pretty, well acted, all that, but they still leave you a bit cold. And this definitely didn't leave me cold. And within the visuals, it's ambitious and cinematic. And bearing in mind, cinema is an immersive medium. It is a truly immersive, surreal experience. And just stuff like, I mean, obviously the rollerblading scene, you either go with it, it's
roller skating.
Oh, sorry. So, a bit out of time there. You sort of think, okay, they're doing this now, or you just really go with it. And that scene particularly, I really went with it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's real. They
really
did do
good
that,
acting,
apparently. They really did do that.
Really fine cast. A really tough film, bleak, dark moments wherein it needs to be. I do have a couple of criticism. One, I think it is overlong. There are bits like potentially the opening scene you could take out. And I do think at times it's a bit corny. I think some of the dialogue is a bit on the nose. I remember something to do with a chicken, some dialogue involving chicken. I can't remember what the exact line is.
I don't know.
And there's the potential for it. I mean, in the end, I think she's a very strong character, the Uper character, but at times that potentially drifted into a love triangle, which I was she's going to be this hapless sort of damsel in the middle. But actually, it didn't in the end.
No.
She grows as a character, and you really get a motive in her sort of stakes, and you're invested in, and you want her to, without giving too much away, sort of make it,
Yeah.
So, her journey I thought was very beautiful. So on the whole, I am positive. I need to rewatch it, obviously. So I think
Everybody needs to rewatch
it's a
it.
good film and a unique film, but maybe not quite the masterpiece you see it as.
Yeah, maybe.
But I don't get the critical hate. I don't see it as a bad film.
Well, I think that is going away. I mean, I do think it's being reappraised a little.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, that's great. So that's Heaven's Gate. Thanks for that. And we'll be talking a bit about Blade Runner after the ads.
Wait a minute!
Beyond Radio.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10-Hauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time. Like tears.
welcome back to Film in Focus. That is a clip from Ridley Scott's cult classic, Bladerunner, the sci-fi. So, Ray, if you want to start.
Yeah, well, this is another film that didn't go down too well at the time. And again, it was another film that I saw when it came out and didn't understand why it got this mauling that it did. I mean, here's an example. It's nothing like as bad as what Heaven's Gate got, to be fair, and it did get some good reviews.
Yeah.
But in the New York Times again, which is the one that Vincent Canby wrote the awful review of Heaven's Gate, Blade Runner is a film that special effects could have easily run away with, and run away with it they have. And it's also a mess, at least as far as its narrative is concerned. Almost nothing is explained coherently, and the plot has great lapses, from the changeable nature of one key character to the frequent disappearances of another. The story lurches along awkwardly, helped not at all by some ponderous stabs at developing Deckard's character. As an old-fashioned detective cruising his way through the space age, Deckard is both tedious and outre. And anyone who uses outre in a review probably doesn't know enough to review films anyway. But there are similarities between the two films. It came out in 1982, originally, and there was a particular version of it, which is what we all saw. Then in 1992, there was a second version, so a longer gap, but even so, there was a second version. And then in the 21st century, Ridley Scott got his chance, much like Cimino did, to make the film the way he wanted.
Called The Final Cut.
Called The Final Cut. So the one that came out in 1982 was called The Director's Cut. But so I'd perhaps talk about the differences between them, between the three versions.
Yeah.
So the original version there was actually a work print. I should probably tell you the story. There was a work print that was shown to a test audience. So this is back in 1981 or 1982, shown to test audiences in Denver and Dallas. And they got such a bad reception that the studio insisted on a happy ending being put on, and also a voiceover to explain stuff. And so what they did, Ridley Scott got footage from The Shining, the outtakes from The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining,
right,
and put them on the end. And he filmed a little bit of Harrison Ford and Sean Young in a kind of futuristic kind of car, but not very much, really. And it's mostly these shots from The Shining that kind of give this idea that they've escaped somewhere.
Right.
And they put this narration on, which Harrison Ford didn't even really seem to understand what he was saying when they said it. When he recorded it, if you hear some of the outtakes, he's quite baffled.
Just a question on that: is The Shining public domain? Is that how they were?
No, I think he got it. He got permission.
He got permission.
I think Kubrick allowed it as long as he didn't use anything that was actually in the actual film.
Right.
So he took outtakes.
Okay.
Some of the aerial shots from the opening of The Shining.
Okay.
But then, by accident, they went to show. The film went to be shown again at some cinema somewhere in Los Angeles, I think, and they got the wrong print. And they got a print which had a dream sequence in that had been cut. I know you couldn't. I mean, well, it gets more bizarre. But this had a dream sequence in, and this dream sequence had become slightly legendary, which is Harrison Ford having a dream about a unicorn.
Yeah.
And the buzz went round that this was the proper version of Blade Runner, where the studio had cut this dream sequence out of the film. And it was a massive sellout. It was a massive success. So they decided we'll do a director's cut. But they kind of rushed it through. They took out the narration, they took out the ending, they put in the dream sequence, and they released it. And I think it was quite successful. But it wasn't the director's cut. This was not Ridley Scott had not approved this cut. And then in 2007, Ridley Scott. Well, this was when it was released. I don't know when he actually did it, but Ridley Scott. Somebody said, "You make the definitive version of Blade Runner so we can say once and for all, this is Ridley Scott's version of Blade Runner." And they did. So they changed. They put a little bit more of the dream sequence in. They didn't put the narration back in. They didn't put the happy ending back in. And they regraded it. They recolor graded it. So it's actually darker than the original one. But they also tidied up some stuff with CGI. Most obviously, right at the very end, the clip we've just played, if anybody hasn't seen it, there's a shot of a dove flying up into the sky. And in the original version and the director's cut, it's like on an industrial estate somewhere, some chimneys. in the final cut, there's this whole city around this dove as it flies away. And that's been done with CGI. And they've also tidied up some bits where there's a stunt double, a very obvious stunt double in one bit. Although I say obvious, I never spotted it, but people did spot it. There was a stunt double, and they filmed the actress who, they just filmed her head, and then they CGI'd it onto the stunt double's body, and it looks fine. I have to say, it does look absolutely fine. But yeah, I mean, so those are the three versions of the film. So much like Heaven's Gate, this film has three different versions. The one that was produced in the 21st century is the one that Ridley Scott approved. Unlike Heaven's Gate, though, I mean, they did use digital technology to grade the film, but that was only out of necessity. They could have done it optically.
Yeah.
Unlike Heaven's Gate, though, they have, added all this digital stuff. So what I find a little sad, and there is this horrible part of me that one day I think I may do this, and I hate myself for it, that you can't see the version Ridley Scott would have made in 1982 anywhere. That doesn't exist, had he been given the chance. So I feel that one day I may get the film's various versions and, put that different shot of the dove back in, with the, and try and, match. But I probably, I hope I won't. I hope I have more of a life that I won't need to do that. But I may do. But yeah, so that's, but again, I mean, I'm baffled by it. I don't understand what people didn't see in the original film, because I remember seeing it. I was with a friend. We both said, this is we came out of the cinema speechless, both sort of saying, that's a masterpiece. That is absolutely incredible. And that is with the voiceover, and that is, yeah.
And I mean, I'm not so keen on the voiceover. I mean, even with it, that original version is still very good.
Yeah.
But there are certain things like the voiceover, then it's needless, and I think it oversells certain things.
It does. I mean, I have mixed feelings about the voiceover, because obviously that's the version I grew up with. And the dream sequence, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but the dream sequence has a point, and taking it out changes kind of something quite fundamental about Deckard's character. I think if anyone's seen it, they'll know what I'm talking about. But and so actually it's quite interesting, because to me, I don't really see that. People have said, oh, obviously it's there because of that. And I go, oh, of course. But I don't really see that, because I grew up with this other version where Deckard's character, didn't have this dream. And the dream is very telling, I think. So, I am baffled. But again, I think it was maybe a film that was a little bit slow. This came out at a time, much like Heaven's Gate, it was coming out when films were getting faster. We were having films like Star Wars and sort of, I don't know what was coming out in the early 80s, but there was a lot of fast action science fiction films. And then suddenly you had this kind of quite ponderous sort of slightly serious look at the future. And I mean, but one of the things you can't deny, I think, was that the look of science fiction changed after Blade Runner. And I mean, and that was the thing, that nobody had ever seen anything like it. But what's interesting, I think the reason it holds up is that actually that's still there in the background. I think, he made the characters interesting, he made the story interesting, and it's well directed. And of course, the difference between Scott and Cimino is Scott went on to have a glittering Hollywood career. I don't think he ever topped Blade Runner, or even came close, really. But of course,
I'd say Alien is
you
his
preferred
best
Alien,
film.
really?
Overall, it's pretty close, but
Yeah.
Alien.
Well, fair enough. I mean, Alien, I think, is his second best. So but
I do love Thelma and Louise, so I'll fly the flag for that as well.
Yeah, that's a good film, and he's and The Martian was good. He's still making films. They're still good. On the whole. But for me, he never got as inventive as he got with Blade Runner.
Yeah.
He never kind of built a world to such an extent. And it's just, I think, that's why I think it's an amazing film. And why we are here talking about it sort of nearly 40 years later.
Great. So I think that might be a good place to sort of end it. we'll no doubt find an excuse to come back to these films. Certainly Blade Runner, because we didn't have as much time, so it would be good to get into it.
I think there's more to say about Heaven's Gate. It's troubled production.
Certainly both films, though, But yeah, thank you very much. That was great.
Thank you.
In a moment, we're going to end with a bit of Blade Runner themed music. Seems a fitting place to end. So this is the last show for a while. So look out online for the show's return. And just to flag a couple things, the Dukes have a season of open-air screenings in the park, Williamson Park, over the summer. You can see classics such as the original Wicker Man, The Princess Bride, classic coming of age, Life of Brian, classic comedy, and also, what was the other one?
Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park,
that's the one I'm really looking forward to.
In the open air, dinosaurs,
Yeah,
as if
absolutely,
they're coming
in the
at you
park.
in the open. Fantastic. So, yeah, look out for that in the listings. And it starts early July with Life of Brian. So, yeah, something for all the family over the summer in Williamson Park. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for Ray.
Thank you.
And if you just want to set up this bit of music and then we'll go to the music, just set it up. And
I see. Sorry. So this is the end title music by Vangelis, who did all the music for Blade Runner, and it's wonderful.
Great stuff. Thank you. Have a good summer.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
And it's not playing.
Here we go.